Welcome to the Farm Family Harmony podcast. I'm Elaine Fraze, Farm Family Coach, here with another episode full of transition tips, tactics, and sometimes hard truths to get harmony on your farm. Hi, folks. Welcome to another issue of the Farm Family Harmony podcast, and you can find us at farmfamilyharmonypodcast.com. I'm really super excited to have my acquaintance and friend Lauren Lundt with us today. We're talking about farming's in-law factor, which is a conversation that I am in many times during the year as a farm family coach. And Lauren and I connected back during the pandemic because she reached out to me. So I'll let her tell you that story. And I know that you're from Centerville, Iowa, because that's an interesting town to be from. So go ahead, Lauren, and tell folks how you and I connected.
Sure. So I am over in Correctionville, Iowa. It's kind of right on the west side. And I don't come from a farming background. I'm born and raised in Central Florida. And I met my husband when we were both on vacation. He was in the military, currently active in the Marine Corps. And I was just on a trip with my girlfriends. So we met, we dated. I decided to move to Iowa with him. He has a family farm here. They've been farming for 2 generations. And he made it very clear that's what I want to do when I get out of the service. And I told him I will too. So fast forward, we've had 3 beautiful kids. At this time, we had one on the way, I believe. So we had our son, Jacob, and then I was about to have my second, my daughter, Abigail. And I was really reaching out and trying to find forums with women who were in the same position as me, that were in farming, didn't come from farming, and were just trying to find their place in it. I found several Facebook groups where I saw a lot of conversations about the struggle that women were having finding their place in their farming family. Typically, it came from their husbands and their families that were farming. They came into it from the outside, not knowing what it's supposed to look like. And I saw a lot of conversations that weren't always helpful. Some cases there were, some cases there weren't. Generationally, the comments and the advice seemed to change depending on who was answering these questions. And so I reached out to Elaine. I connected with her because she has a lot of resources. She's been in this, talking about this for a long time. She has a book, Farming's In-Law Factor, that we were able to give to everybody who attended this webinar. And her and I got together and decided, okay, what does this need to look like? What does the conversation need to be that we can really help women understand the positions that they're in, the family that they're coming into, and how to connect and communicate in a positive way, so that everybody's benefiting and flourishing. I think
So fitting and flourishing, those are great adjectives. And I just was checking with you again this morning, Lauren, that you have seen a bit of a shift, thankfully, in some of those Facebook and other Instagram forums or wherever you're looking at groups of farm women, and that maybe it's also, as you said earlier before we were online, about the admins trying to keep things more positive or more solutions based. So I wrote this book with Dr. Megan McKenzie 10 years ago this June. So this book's now 10 years old. But again, it's about, for Farming's In-Law Factor, it's how you become part of a new family system. So since you and I did this webinar a couple of years ago, which is also, by the way, folks, for you, those of you listening, if you want to buy it, it's on my shop at farmfamilycoach.com. Just scroll down to the bottom of the shop for like $40. But what's interesting to me is this tension between, you were an urban person from Florida coming to Correctionville, Iowa, be with the love of your life, and now you've got this great family. But you've also had some deep loss in the last year too, Lauren, and that's the journey of life, right? So what is helpful to you now at the stage that you are as a daughter-in-law and with 3 children and with your farm, and your mother-in-law has recently become a widow?
Yeah, so my father-in-law passed away over the holidays, unexpectedly, really. And at the same time, my husband also lost his aunt on my father-in-law's side as well. So his cousin, who's about the same age as him, they both are trying to get into farming. He's lost both his parents already now, with his mother gone unexpectedly. So I'm seeing them lean on each other, which is a really beautiful thing. They're able to ask each other for help. Both of their fathers were brothers.
Right.
They've both now lost their fathers, and they're farming and have cattle to carry on what their dads have already done. Our dynamic in the house has completely shifted. Our whole world kind of turned upside down. I felt that it was my responsibility to my family. We were able to make it work where I can stay home with my girls. My son's in kindergarten. I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old. It did not work for daycare. Our daycare shut down. So we made
So you pivoted. Right, that worked.
and looking at the positive, the good P word. Yeah, so we're learning this new normal at this point. My husband had to take a lot on. It was planting season when my father-in-law got into this accident last March. And that's when everything kind of got put on hold with what he could do. So my husband had to make a lot of decisions by himself in a lot of cases on what we were going to plant. He already had an idea, but he was the one doing it for the first time ever. So it was a lot on him. And I mean, he's the kind of strong Marine that can take anything, honestly, and with grace and beauty for sure. So he's been managing all of that, figuring out what the new normal looks like for him.
And you're in a new season too, because you're off farm work. You pulled back from because you have 3 children under 5, and a husband who's carrying a lot more of the load now because his father is no longer there as part of the partnership. So I think for listeners, I think it's important, Lauren, as part of the outcome-based solutions that we look at the challenges of being an in-law, is that the seasons of your life on the farm are going to change. And I think it's also a beautiful thing how you've talked about your husband's cousin, who the two of them are leaning on each other. So talk about who you see farm women in your neighborhood and in your friendship group. Who are women going to for emotional support as in-laws?
I think they're going back to their own family in many cases. I think one of the things that I still and will probably continue to struggle with here is the lonely factor. I don't have very many friends. I haven't been able to connect with a lot of the women in our community. That being said, it's not that they're standoffish or anything like that, where we all get busy in our own lives and they have family close by
To support. And your mom is in Florida.
And my parents are both in Florida. Now, that being said, technology is a beautiful thing. My mom will hop on a plane in an instant and be up here whenever we need her. So I have that connection with them, but that may also hinder me from trying to make those connections here. That's what I'm finding. But I really do think women in this area pull to their own family and with issues, anything that they have to deal with. It's a big, strong family base.
Right. And that's good to have a healthy family circle to do that. But sometimes the tension and the stress is in that intimate family circle. And I mean, I'm going to hold up my cell phone right now because I'm a big believer in staying connected to girlfriends and people who know you from a long time ago. I just had a retreat here at a national park just 2 hours north of us with a group of 7 friends who we've been friends for 50 years. And now some of them are starting to turn 70. And so we celebrated the fact of our friendship, but it's also something that needs time and attention. So as a young mom with 2, preschoolers and a kindergartner, what are your hacks sort of for making sure that you're you're filling up your cup and you're making sure that your well is full so that you have something to give.
A big piece of that is staying off social media, to be honest.
Staying off?
Yes, I think that
Oh, you don't want to compare yourself to everybody else and be Facebook fine?
it drains my cup. You
Okay.
fill my cup.
Okay.
It drains my cup.
Okay.
I have a group of friends. There's 6 of them. They were my bridesmaids in my wedding, and the majority of them I've been close to for about 20 years.
Okay.
So that is my core group right there. And then my mom. My mom and I's relationship has really evolved since I've had kids, and we've gotten closer. We've become friends. I lean on her for basically everything.
Or a sober second thought and some wisdom and some understanding.
And she's the kind of person, and I really do think that we all need to find that person that you can go to and you can vent to, but that does not feed into negativity.
Right.
There's many cases where she could hear me complaining, oh, my mother-in-law did this, and it's frustrating, and she could, oh, well, she shouldn't do that. She's being this or that, and she's not that kind of person.
No.
She says, in a lot of cases, she reads the situation, and she says, Lauren may have misinterpreted that, or at one point she did have to say, I think you're taking it personally. I don't think it was meant that way. And in that particular case, that was true. So it's leaning on those girlfriends, that support.
It sounds like healthy relationships, Lauren.
Yeah.
People who aren't going to drag you down into what we call in coaching the downward spiral of negativity. Because what does that serve? And I think that's why you and I first connected, is because you just were tired of seeing what you described earlier on as ranting.
Yeah.
You can rant to your mom and she can listen to you, or you can rant to your girlfriends that you've had for 20 years, but they can also say, hey, there's always 2 sides to every story. So your mother-in-law is a new widow and you see her way more often than you do your own mother, which was the case also with me. And when I've written my books, I dedicated Farming's In-Law Factor. If I look on the dedication page, I'll just read it: to courageous farm families who are ready to talk, act, and create an amazing legacy. And Megan dedicated it to my feisty grandmothers and grandmothers-in-law. And it's interesting that we're recording this on International Women's Day, because women in agriculture play many different roles. So your mother-in-law is a very strong woman. She's adapting to be a widow. What are the communication tips that have helped you, Lauren, be clear and true to who you are and what you need and want, and also respecting what your mother-in-law wants? Do you have some favorite phrases that you use? One that I use with my daughter-in-law is, what would you like me to do differently? Or are you okay? Or what do you need in this moment? Because she lives right next door to me and is raising 3 children, 6, 5, and 4. So there's a lot going on in that house too. So what helps with the communication with you and your in-law?
That's a great question. I think the most honest answer I can give is I'm still figuring it out.
Okay.
I don't have a go-to phrase. We are both very different. We're similar in our interest. We're similar in the fact we love to garden. We love to get creative.
That's good.
We love art. We love the kids.
And beauty. Mm-hmm.
But we're very different in terms of how we grew up and what we want to do in our free time. She's very much a homebody, and she said that herself. She calls herself kind of a hermit. She doesn't want to go out. She was actually in a car accident several years ago when my son was about 1 or 2, and she was in a school bus. Thankfully, no children were on board, but she was not able to drive bus anymore after, and she hasn't been able to drive. She got PTSD after it.
Oh, okay.
There's a factor of not being able to drive and that kind of thing.
So her life has transitioned very significantly as well then.
Yes, and it did far before this. So she's navigating that the best she can. The thing that I have to reevaluate in our situation is to try to understand where she's coming from with some of the ways that she reacts to stuff. And she probably needs to do the same thing for me. One of the big differences between us is she's I think she came from a generation of this, and she grew up this way where you made the most out of what you had.
Right.
Just throw something out because it ripped. And I'm kind of from a generation where, well, if the living room rug is getting kind of dingy, like, let's get a new one. No, you need to keep it up. You can't just throw something out and get a new one all the time.
Right. So the whole mindset around financial, what story you tell yourself about whether there's scarcity or whether there's abundance or whether things can be replaced. And
Well, and I was doing this, I think, to myself, where I thought she was judging the way that I was living my life. And she never said anything. She would never say anything to anyone else, but I was putting
felt
that
it.
in my head. That's what I was thinking. Oh, well, she's probably thinking, why did you buy that? Like, that's an extravagant thing. And she never did. But we were just very different on the way we set up our house, the things we spent our time doing.
And are you okay with different being not different is just different, it's not wrong?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So we're navigating that. The one thing I will say, and this happened yesterday, actually, when I was planning with her on who was going to watch the kids, if she could watch them during this podcast, and it was through text. And I text her something about, I've got this on Friday, can you watch them? And just got a very short response back. And I took it personally, right off the bat. Well, you don't want to watch them, and it's inconvenient for you. I'm sorry. Like, now I feel bad. I talked to her the next day, and it was fine. She said, oh, that shouldn't be a problem at all. So I just made this.
Right. And that's why I hate texting for communication. Let's just put that out there right now. With my daughter-in-law, if it takes more than 2 texts to solve an issue, I say, pick up the phone. I mean, I can even talk to her. I even have communication with my daughter-in-law on an FM radio. I can pick up a radio and beam into her house and say, are you okay right now? I need to talk to you. We're going to figure this out like really fast. But that's a really, really good example for everyone to hear, because I'm a big believer in being able to see people's eyeballs. And the eyes are the window to the soul, and to have a sense of the tonality. Like, you took it personally. It wasn't personal at all. She just didn't have time to give you a long text. She gave you a short text. And she didn't put a heart or a smiley emoji.
Yeah, she's not a big emoji person. Where I think what caught me so off guard when I first came into this marriage was she's very different from my mom. My mom's from the South. She'll smile when she has the flu. And
How out on
it. And they're just very different. Like you said, different.
Welcome to Iowa.
Different. Well, I had to get used to that. She's not mad at me when I talk to her on the phone. That's just kind of how she's felt.
Wow. What was really amazing to me is I had the privilege in early February of being with the Iowa young farmers, and there were 520 of them in the room. And what I had not realized, where you live, Lauren, is one of the most intense agriculture areas in the entire country and in North America, because there's 156,000 families, I think, that belong to the Iowa Farm Bureau. And in Canada, we only have 195,000 families in the whole country. So what's interesting about where you live and the kind of agriculture community that you experience is that everybody has a way of doing things, and some of them are 3, 4, 5th generation farms, right? And so, again, just describing how your mom treats you and is a feedback to you, and how your mother-in-law is different, that's okay. But you also used the word earlier, she is trying, and you are trying, and your husband is trying to navigate the new normal, which is the death of the father and the death of one of the founders. And being ready for that. And I think the reason we put the brown egg on the cover, you are very skilled at marketing and graphic design, and you love art and you love beauty. So you will spend money on things to make your home a beautiful place, because we can tell just by looking in your background, it is a beautiful place, because that's important to you. And I have trouble with daughter-in-laws who are feeling judged for Amazon packages that, I've had families, Elaine, you should see how many Amazon packages come to her door. And I'm thinking, you have really no idea what's going on. And the Irish have this great saying, every front door looks beautiful, but you don't really know what's going on until you get into the front, past the front door, right? So the people listening to this podcast as farming's in-law factor, what I would like everyone to hear is, I can't read your mind. So please tell me what you're thinking. Tell me what you're needing and feeling and wanting. And I have a different money script too. I wear other people's clothes that they hand down to me because I'm kind of like your mother-in-law. I don't like to spend a lot of money on stuff that people are happy to give me in different ways. Not that I'm cheap. I do have very expensive clothes that I've bought myself, but I have a different value system. And also I just gave up last spring growing a garden for 40 years, Lauren. And so where is it written? And here's a helpful piece of language for all in-laws. Where is it written that as the daughter-in-law on this farm, I have to have a garden? It's written in the unwritten rule book, right? But you have to challenge the unwritten expectations or the unspoken expectations that people have of you. So the good news is my daughter-in-law, who also like you grew up in a city and never gardened, last year took half the garden as an experiment. And she said, Mom, she goes, Mom, next year I want the whole thing. I said, yes. Because my grandson loves to play with his little cultivator tool, and he's happy as a 4-year-old, spending a lot of time picking peas and carrots and digging up the dirt in the garden. So it's a great activity for her to be outside, to be stretching, bending, and active and growing carrots and good food for her family. But I still get picking right. So I just wanted to do a shout out to the listeners that if you don't like the current relationship that you have in your family dynamic on the farm, then what are you doing to ask for what you need? So Lauren, if I asked you this question, with the season you're in now, we're in March again, it's an anniversary of your father-in-law's accident coming up. What do you need as a daughter-in-law right now?
I guess it's a tricky thing to ask answer, because I know what I want. I know what I'd like in a perfect world for this dynamic to look like, but I can't make somebody something they're not.
Right. Or respond in a way they're not capable of.
Exactly. And that's what I've really learned the last year with certain people. And in talking to my sister-in-law, who I've gotten so close to the last year, who really have the best understanding of her mom than anybody, is to voice what you need to voice, but don't assume you're going to get the response back that you want. That's going to make you feel better. Only come to the table with what you want to share, but don't give that person the power to make you feel resolved.
Or yes, then.
Yes, because they may not be able to. They may be incapable.
Or they may not have capacity, we would say.
Yeah. And that's where I kind of had it built up in my head where I needed to have certain conversations and to come out. And maybe if we just put everything out on the table, it'll be fixed and it'll be clean and happy and positive. And no matter how you come to the table, it may not be resolved the way you'd like it to. So you've got to find some sort of common ground there, I guess. I don't know the right terms for it, but
and I worked also in Omaha this winter with young farmers at Coach on Call in the Hall at a conference I was speaking at. And what they found helpful as a couple was to do some counseling work. And I've been working with a coach, and she said, Elaine, what I've come to learn is boundaries are really important self-care. And so I would also throw that out to the listeners to think about what are healthy boundaries for you, Lauren, in your situation now, and also managing expectations, right? So your sister-in-law is saying you can't expect someone to respond to you in the way that you want to when they don't have the bandwidth or the capacity to do that, or that's just not the way that they're wired. So I think from a conflict communication perspective, coming from curiosity and checking in with people, are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? Yeah, I'm good. And I said, well, I'm here to have a deeper conversation with you if you want, but it's your call. So that you're not, like you say, putting everything out on the table, like, bleh,
yeah.
and finding out that they don't really care because
And they
They
don't
have
want to
no,
talk about it.
that they don't want to talk about it. And the other thing I learned about Iowa when I was with these young farmers is the stoicness and the cultural DNA that comes from a lot of families that happen to settle in Iowa. And my grandmother, by the way, was of Danish descent, born in Gladbrook, Iowa. So she moved to Canada and became my grandmother, obviously, later on. So there's different cultural pieces here too. And you also mentioned, Lauren, that your mom is from the South. So the people in that culture have been trained or have had a different cultural experience on how they believe and behave and make decisions, right? And they put a smile on their face even when they're really not that happy or maybe not that healthy. So they might not be as honest or vulnerable as maybe a different culture would be. So that's what makes life really interesting. But I think I just want to say thank you for reaching out a couple of years ago to me to make this webinar happen that we now have a recording of. I also find it interesting that I'm never asked to speak at conferences on farming's in-law factor, but we always talk about it. And so it's one of those sort of undiscussables, bull in the middle of the room thing that, wow, if I'm sitting in Elaine's seminar, everybody's going to think I'm having trouble with my in-laws, which isn't necessarily the case, right? So, Lauren, just in wrapping up, if you could tell the women and men in agriculture who are listening to this podcast right now, what is the one thing that you think would be helpful for them to understand about navigating what you've learned with the in-law factor? And just because you were very astute to see all the ranting and raving and said, Elaine, this has to stop. So we did the webinar. We had over 90 people on the wait list. Lots of people wanted to come, but only 25 wanted to pay, which I also thought was interesting because you can complain about the way your life looks, but are you willing to put some money and resources, energy, and time towards helping things get healthier? So, Lauren, what do you want the in-law factor to be now for? What do you want young women in agriculture to hear now?
So it's funny. I talked about this podcast coming up with my husband, and I kind of wanted to get his take on things too. He's been right there with me at all of it, and we're a very strong bond where we very transparent with everything, and we've kind of always been that way. We're best friends. But I think the biggest thing, and after talking with him, I think that we're in agreement here, is that it does not have to look like it did with their parents.
Right.
It isn't the way farming goes. Because I came into this and I heard from the get-go from several people, that's just what it is to be a farmer.
So they've just settled into complacency. They've settled.
They think that because this was the way they did it, that's the way it has to be done. And my husband is number one on having to figure that out more than anybody. And I asked him if it was okay to kind of share this, but his dad told him, you can't do things the way that I did them if you want this to work for you.
He gave him permission to change.
But at the same time, he couldn't find a way to change it for himself. So his way of helping was, and I have an example here because he did this all the time, we had to grind feed for cattle. We have fat cattle or feeder cattle outside, and when we have the yards full, we have to grind feed, which can take up to 2 hours. The way that we do it, maybe several times a week, 2 or 3 times a week. Matthew's dad would always go grind feed so Matthew could come inside to be with us a little bit earlier. And that was, Matthew said, his way he thinks of helping, of giving back the way he didn't when Matthew was growing up. And you go inside. What Matthew had to deal with was the guilt of my 70-year-old dad's outside in the cold grinding feed right now, and I'm inside in a warm house. And he had to constantly check himself. I'm not just not working. I'm with my family. I'm with my kids. And I give it to him full force. He held himself accountable to that. He wants to be there as much as possible for his kids. And he got that to an extent with his family, with growing up, but it did look much different than it does for our family. And We
And I
had to
think,
figure that out.
and I think what you're touching on is a huge tension with the next generation. I've had young men say, Elaine, I am going to go off the field and tuck my kids into bed and read stories to them and get them tucked in. And then I am going to go back out on the tractor. So the way that the next generation wants to navigate that ongoing polarity between work and play and family and the farm, that is what we call a polarity. It's something that will always have to be managed. It'll never be checked off the list. So Matt has had some awareness about what was going on inside of his head, right? To figure out whether he wanted to feel guilty about spending time with you and the kids. Tell the story to the audience about the day he went to the rodeo in the Middle East.
Yeah, so it was hay season. So it was summertime, and it was one example of several, honestly, that he's run into with his dad, where his dad wanted him to stay and that they needed to do this certain thing, and that the rodeo just couldn't happen. We were taking my son to the rodeo last 2 summers ago, and Matthew stopped, and I'm going to the rodeo. I'm not gonna feel guilty about this anymore. I want to spend time with my son. And to Dad's point, he said you got to do things different. But just saying that is a lot easier than when it's in action.
You actually get off the tractor and go to the rodeo.
Yeah. So what my husband did is he went to the rodeo with us, and this is just the kind of man that he is. He didn't check his watch. He didn't say, okay, we're going to leave after this. Like, he stayed there and he engaged in everything. And that's when we left. And then he got back on the tractor and worked till 2:00 in the morning. So to get the job done. And he's had to do that several times, and he'll have to do that several times once our kids start sports. But that's what it looks like for us.
And you're okay, and everybody's okay with that, because that the work will get done, but the family will also, there will also be time to be present with the family.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are seasons when that can't happen. Right now, he's also still in the reserves. That's how we get our health care. So he's in California this week. So, I mean, things do get missed, but holding on to those grudges on why, when it didn't happen, I think really holds you back from growing. Yeah.
Well, I was at a thrift store after speaking in Lemon, South Dakota this winter at the end of January. And it was a weird January because it was so warm. We had the door open of the hall the entire day. But one of the new habits we have, Lauren, one of my coaches, Lydia Carpin, and I, is after we do a full day seminar of talking through all these issues and helping farmers find fairness in farm transition, we try and find the local thrift store. So we're walking down the street in Lemon, South Dakota, and wouldn't you know, the thrift store has a sign for $2 that says, "Give it all to God." And I thought, okay, I'm buying this sign. So what you've just described is letting go of things that you have no control over. You don't control the other person's response. You listen to their heart's cry and what you think that they're telling you, and then you debrief that or say, is this what you really mean? And you also come to the point where, no, I am going to the rodeo with my son, and I'm going to let go all the angst of my father because this is more important for me to spend time with Jacob. So thank you so much for your transparency today. And thank you again for reaching out those couple of years ago when you and I first connected to orchestrate a webinar for Farming's In-Law Factor so that people would have some idea of the essence of figuring out how to navigate the seasons of being an in-law. And my last word before we part today is, for any of you who are still using the language, oh, we have to go deal with the outlaws, stop. Do not use negative language. And I corrected someone quite forcefully, actually, when I heard that word recently, and it's not helpful. So for all of you listening to this podcast and Farming's In-Law Factor, I want to say thank you, Lauren, for your time here today, and blessings on your family as you navigate the new journey and again, the anniversaries of your father-in-law's passing, and with your mom, and say thanks to your mom. I lost my mom when I was 43 years old, so I have navigated adopting other women, and that's the other curiosity is, adopt somebody in your town or in your community who can be like an adopted mom to you, to have that emotional support if you lost that at an early age. So thank you, listeners, for your time. Please share this far and wide so other people can be encouraged on how to think about navigating farming's in-law factor. And we'll see you next time. I'm Elaine Frace, Farm Family Coach, and wishing you all the ways and tools that you can get by joining and spending time with us to find harmony through understanding. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.